The radio crackled to life with a sound that made everyone in the forward operating base freeze. Not the usual chatter of routine communications, but the kind of transmission that turned blood to ice. Mayday, Mayday. This is Hawk 79er, 50 SEALs pinned down. Grid, November Delta, 3274. Heavy contact. We're surrounded. I repeat, we are surrounded. Inside the Joint Military Operations Center, 18 senior officers crowded around the tactical display table. The satellite feed showed a mountainous region to the east where 50 Navy SEALs were trapped in a kill zone, with enemy forces closing in from 3 sides. The room smelled of stale coffee and anxiety. Nobody noticed the woman in logistics fatigue standing near the back wall, carefully balancing a tray of fresh coffee cups, her hands trembling ever so slightly. Women don't belong in here when men are discussing tactics. Lieutenant Colonel Cyrus Dalton's hand swept dismissively across the table, knocking over the cup Irina Carter had just set down. Hot coffee splashed across the floor, spattering her uniform pants. Get out. Now. Irina Carter, the name stitched on her supply specialist badge, lowered her eyes and stepped backward toward the door. But her gaze never left the tactical screen. In the span of 5 seconds, she had processed the terrain elevation, calculated firing angles, identified the enemy stronghold position, and mapped 3 possible extraction routes. Her posture shifted almost imperceptibly, shoulders squaring from their submissive hunch into something that resembled parade rest. Her fingers drummed against her thigh in a precise rhythm, 3 taps, pause, 2 taps. It was combat timing, the kind of muscle memory that only developed after years of living through firefights. They'll be dead in 12 minutes. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Major Kelvin Marshall spun around. What did you say? Irina remained silent, but her eyes tracked the red indicators converging on the blue friendly marker. 50 lives, a countdown clock. And she, the only person in this room who knew exactly how to save them, had just been dismissed because she'd brought coffee instead of carrying a rifle. The room erupted into chaos. Dalton jabbed his finger at coordinates on the northern ridge. Marshall argued for a delayed drone strike. Captain Crystal Frost, the only other woman present and wearing the rank insignia of a full officer, shot Irina a look of pure disdain before turning her attention to the arguing men. Nobody saw Irina carefully fold a paper napkin into precise squares, creating a scale replica of the tactical grid with distances marked by creases. Nobody saw the way her body had unconsciously shifted into a ready stance weight, distributed for rapid movement. Nobody noticed except for one person. Tech Sergeant Mason Reed, a 24-year-old communications operator, glanced at the napkin Irina had set down. His eyes widened slightly. That wasn't random folding. That was a tactical map, accurate to scale, with elevation markers indicated by fold depths. He looked up at her face, but she had already slipped through the door into the corridor. Irina stood outside the operations center, using a worn cloth to wipe coffee stains from her pants. Through the reinforced glass window, she could see the officers gesturing frantically at the display. The radio on the wall crackled again. Hawk 79er to base, ammunition critical, 8 minutes until we're overrun. Where's that air support? Her jaw tightened. 8 minutes. Not 12, the situation had deteriorated faster than even she'd calculated. Dalton was pointing at the wrong coordinates, preparing to authorize a strike that would miss the enemy position entirely, while alerting them to the SEAL's exact location. Marshall was arguing for reconnaissance drone deployment, which would take at least 10 minutes to position. Crystal stood with her arms crossed, nodding along with whatever the senior male officers suggested. Inside the operations center, Admiral Arthur Brennan stood in the far corner, observing in silence. He was officially retired, but maintained an advisory role due to his decades of tactical experience. His weathered face showed no emotion as he watched the chaos unfold, but his eyes kept drifting to the corridor where Irina had disappeared. Colonel Hannah Pierce, the senior intelligence officer, studied the terrain data with growing concern. The extraction window is closing. If we don't get air support in the next 6 minutes, those SEALs are going to be fighting hand-to-hand in caves. We need decisive action. Dalton snapped his finger, hovering over the authorization button for the strike. I'm calling in coordinates November, Delta 35. That's 3 clicks west of the target. The words came from the doorway. Every head turned. Irina had stepped back inside, ignoring the coffee stains on her uniform. She moved directly to the tactical display, her demeanor completely transformed. Gone was the deferential supply clerk. Her voice carried the weight of someone accustomed to being obeyed. But here's what everyone in that room failed to notice: the way she calculated blast radius in 3 seconds. The military posture that slipped through for just a moment, the specific terminology only combat veterans know. What they were about to discover would flip everything upside down. If you want to see how this underdog moment becomes the most shocking military reveal of the year, you need to keep watching. Because when that shirt sleeve tears and everyone sees what's underneath, the entire room will freeze. Trust me, you don't want to miss the moment when 50 Navy SEALs realize who just saved their lives. Dalton's face flushed crimson. Who authorized her return security escort this woman? With respect, Colonel, your coordinates will kill the people you're trying to save. Irina's finger traced a path on the display. The enemy stronghold is here, elevation 4,500 meters occupying the eastern ridgeline. Your strike coordinates hit an empty valley. Marshall stood up his chair, scraping loudly against the floor. And how exactly would a supply clerk know tactical coordinates? What's your source? Irina's eyes remained fixed on the tactical screen, scanning the terrain with the practiced efficiency of someone who had read similar maps hundreds of times. The same way you know your rifle's serial number, Major, experience. Experience? Crystal's voice dripped with contempt as she stepped forward. You process supply requisitions. The closest you've been to combat is watching movies. Sergeant Derek Kane, a barrel-chested combat veteran with 3 deployment patches on his sleeve, let out a harsh laugh. Let me guess you played Call of Duty. Maybe watch some YouTube videos on tactics. Irina didn't respond to the mockery. Instead, she reached across the table and picked up a disassembled M4 carbine that Lieutenant Aiden West had been cleaning before the emergency. Her hands moved with fluid precision, muscle memory taking over, as she reassembled the weapon in complete silence. 8 seconds. The metallic clicks of parts sliding into place were the only sounds in the suddenly quiet room. Kane's smirk faded. Lucky guess. Do it again. Without a word, Irina disassembled the carbine and reassembled it again. 7 seconds this time. Her fingers never fumbled, never hesitated. When she set the completed weapon down, she finally looked up at Kane. Any other tests? Sergeant Admiral Brennan straightened slightly in his corner, his eyes narrowing with interest. He leaned forward, studying Irina with the focused attention of someone recognizing a familiar melody in an unexpected place. This is ridiculous, Crystal interjected, her voice rising. Anyone can learn weapon assembly. It doesn't make you qualified to. The radio cut through her words with brutal clarity. Hawk 7-9er, 6 minutes. We're down to grenades and sidearms. Where is that air support? The voice belonged to Commander Dylan Morrison, call sign Hawk, one of the most decorated SEAL team leaders in the Navy. The strain in his transmission was unmistakable. This was a man staring down his final minutes. Dalton grabbed for the radio handset. Hawk 7-9er, this is base. Air support inbound to November, Delta 3-5. Irina's hand shot out and caught his wrist. The movement was too fast, too controlled, executed with the kind of precision that came from years of combat training. That's the wrong coordinate. Get your hands off me. Dalton tried to pull free, but Irina's grip was iron. For a moment, everyone in the room saw something else. Not a supply clerk, but someone with the muscle memory of a fighter. Someone whose body knew how to control and neutralize threats. Marshall moved closer, his eyes fixed on Irina's hands. Those calluses, on your trigger finger and the webbing of your thumb. Those aren't from pushing paperwork. He looked up at her face. How long what? Irina released Dalton's wrist and stepped back. How long were you operational? The door burst open before Irina could answer. Captain Logan Hayes, a combat pilot, strode in, wearing his flight suit helmet tucked under his arm. Someone give me coordinates. I've got 2 F-18 Super Hornets armed and ready, but I need a target, now. Every eye in the room turned to Dalton, who stood frozen, his earlier confidence evaporating under the weight of responsibility. If he gave the wrong coordinates, 50 SEALs would die. If he hesitated any longer, they would die anyway. Irina looked at Admiral Brennan. The old officer studied her face for 3 long seconds, then gave an almost imperceptible nod. She turned to Logan. Stand by for coordinates. Her voice had changed entirely. No longer the apologetic tone of a supply clerk, but the crisp authority of someone accustomed to directing combat operations. She moved to the communications station, her fingers dancing across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. Hawk 7-9er, this is... She paused, her hand hovering over the transmit button. This is base operations. Authentication required. Base operations? Dylan's voice crackled back, confusion evident. New coordinator, authenticate with call sign. Irina's jaw clenched. She couldn't use her old call sign, not without revealing everything. Authentication code, Whiskey Delta 7. Do you copy? The radio went silent for 3 full seconds. When Dylan's voice returned, it carried a note of shock. That's a commander-level authentication code. Who is this? Across the room, Master Chief Noah Barrett had just entered to deliver a status report. He froze mid-step when he heard Irina's voice giving coordinates. His weathered face went pale. That voice... Irina ignored him, her focus entirely on the tactical situation. She began rattling off specifications with mechanical precision. Target coordinates November Delta 3274. Enemy positions Alpha through Delta, approximately 200 hostiles. Elevation differential 1,600 feet. Current wind speed 12 knots from the northwest. Recommend approach Vector 270. Altitude Angels 1-5 weapons free on designated targets only. Logan's eyes widened. You just gave me a complete strike package in 15 seconds. Who are you? Someone who wants those SEALs to come home. Irina turned back to the tactical display, her fingers tracing paths across the screen. You'll have a 4-minute window. Enemy positions will be marked with infrared strobes. Friendly position is... How do you know about IR strobes? Marshall interrupted. That's classified SEAL procedure. Specialist Daisy Chen, a young communications technician, whispered to Mason. She sounds like a combat controller. The way she's rattling off those numbers, the terminology, that's not something you learn from a manual. Kane stepped between Irina and the communications console. I don't care how many weapons you can assemble. You're not authorized to coordinate. Then, who is? Irina's voice was steel. Because in 4 minutes, those men are dead. So, either you authorize someone to coordinate this strike, or you explain to 50 families why their loved ones died while you were measuring credentials. The room fell silent. Even Dalton seemed at a loss for words. Admiral Brennan finally spoke, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. Let her coordinate the strike. Admiral, with respect, Dalton began. Colonel, I said, let her coordinate. Brennan's tone left no room for argument. And everyone else in this room shut up and let her work. Irina didn't wait for further authorization. She keyed the radio. Hawk 7-9er, mark your position with IR and take cover. Danger close strike inbound 60 seconds. Copy that, but I need to know who am I talking to. Your voice sounds... Dylan's transmission cut off as gunfire erupted in the background. Contact, they're breaching our perimeter. Irina's hands moved with desperate speed across the control panel. She pulled up satellite imagery laser designation markers and communication channels simultaneously. Her fingers flew across multiple keyboards, inputting data faster than most operators could read it. Crystal watched in growing disbelief. Where did you learn to... not now? Irina's voice was clipped, focused. She activated the laser targeting system and began painting targets on the satellite feed. Logan, I'm designating 4 primary targets. Alpha is the enemy command position North Ridge. Bravo and Charlie are their heavy weapon emplacements. Delta is their escape route, block it first. Logan's voice came through with professional calm. Copy all. 30 seconds to weapons release. Confirm friendlies are marked. Friendlies marked with blue IR strobe north-northwest of your primary target 200 meters. Danger close authorization given. Irina glanced at the countdown timer she'd started. Impact in 15 seconds. The room held its collective breath. On the satellite feed, everyone could see the thermal signatures of the trapped SEALs, a tight cluster of blue markers surrounded by a sea of red enemy signatures. The distance between the two groups was terrifyingly small. Marshall leaned toward Hannah. If those coordinates are off by even 30 meters, then 50 men die. Hannah finished quietly. Irina stood motionless, her eyes fixed on the screen. Her lips moved silently, counting down the seconds. At 0, she keyed the radio. Impact! The satellite feed erupted in white blooms of thermal energy. 4 precision strikes hit in rapid succession, each one landing exactly where Irina had designated. The red signatures scattered, then began winking out as the overwhelming firepower found its targets. "Direct hits! All 4 targets destroyed!" Logan's voice carried barely restrained excitement. "Enemy forces are in full retreat. Hawk 7-9er, you're clear for extraction." Dylan's voice came through thick with emotion and disbelief. "Base, whoever you are, you just saved 50 lives. Those strikes were perfect, absolutely perfect." A pause. "In 20 years of combat, I've never seen target designation that precise under pressure." "Who is this?" Irina's hand hovered over the transmit button, but she didn't respond. Around the room, phones were appearing in hands as people began frantically searching databases, trying to figure out who this supply clerk really was. Sergeant Liam Crawford, Irina's nominal supervisor in the logistics department, had pulled up her personnel file on a tablet. "Irina Carter, supply specialist, enlisted 18 months ago?" He scrolled down. "No prior service listed, just a civilian hire who came in through the standard logistics track." "That's impossible," Marshall said flatly. "Nobody learns to coordinate strikes like that without years of training. Check deeper. Look for transfers, reassignments, anything classified." Liam typed, rapidly accessing deeper database layers. The others crowded around watching the screen. When the next page loaded, it showed a standard logistics career path, requisition management inventory, control supply chain coordination. Nothing that would explain what they'd just witnessed. "It doesn't make sense," Crystal said, but her voice had lost its earlier contempt and now carried a note of uncertainty. "She's just a supply clerk. The file says the file is incomplete." Admiral Brennan had moved closer, his eyes fixed on Irina. Colonel Pierce accessed the classified personnel database. Security clearance level 5. Hannah's fingers flew across her terminal. "Admiral, that requires your personal authorization code." "You have it." Brennan rattled off a 12-digit sequence. "Now, search for Carter Irina. All records." The system processed the query. A loading icon spun for several seconds. When the results appeared, the screen displayed a single line in red text. "Access denied. Level 5. Clearance required. File sealed by Joint Chiefs. Authorization." The room went very, very quiet. Mason's voice broke the silence little more than a whisper. Why would a supply clerk have a sealed file at that level? Kane's earlier mockery had vanished, replaced by growing unease. He stepped closer to Irina, his voice lower, now almost respectful. "Who are you?" Irina didn't answer. She was focused on the radio traffic, listening to the SEAL team beginning their extraction. Her body language had shifted again, shoulders relaxing slightly as the immediate crisis passed. But there was something else in her posture now, a weariness that suggested she'd been carrying a heavy weight for a very long time. The satellite communication system in that operations center represents cutting-edge military-grade technology, the kind of encrypted real-time tactical coordination platform that can mean the difference between life and death in combat zones. These advanced defense communication networks integrate multiple data streams, satellite imagery, drone feeds, and secure radio channels into one unified command interface. For military professionals and defense contractors, understanding these integrated tactical communication systems is crucial. Modern warfare depends on millisecond precise coordination across multiple platforms, and the technology enabling that coordination continues to evolve rapidly with AI-enhanced threat assessment and automated response protocols. Dalton had recovered some of his composure, though his face remained flushed. "Commander Carter," he said, using the authentication code rank she'd transmitted, "I believe we deserve an explanation." "Commander?" Crystal's voice was sharp. "She's a supply specialist. The file clearly says, the file is sealed." Hannah interrupted, still staring at her terminal. "Which means there's something in her background that requires the highest level of security clearance to access. That kind of seal doesn't get applied to supply clerks." Irina finally turned away from the communications console. She looked at the faces around her, confusion, suspicion, curiosity, and in Admiral Brennan's case, something that might have been sad understanding. "The seals are secure. That's what matters." "That's not an answer," Marshall pressed. "Your call sign, Whiskey Delta 7. I've been in special operations for 15 years, and I've never encountered that authentication sequence. Because it's retired, Noah said quietly. The old Master Chief had been standing against the wall, his face working through a series of motions. That code was assigned to... He trailed off, shaking his head. No, that's not possible. What's not possible? Kane demanded. Noah looked at Irina, really looked at her, studying her face with the intensity of someone trying to reconcile impossible information. That authentication code belonged to a commander who was declared killed in action 2 years ago. I'm not dead, Irina said simply. Then why does your file say, Dalton began. My file says I'm a supply clerk because that's what I requested. Irina's voice was flat, emotionless. After Operation Redwing 2, I submitted my resignation. It was modified into a transfer instead. Hannah's fingers were already typing, searching for any unclassified information about Operation Redwing 2. What she found made her face go pale. Redwing 2, Afghanistan 19 months ago. Joint Special Operations Task Force mission. 8 personnel killed in action, including... She looked up at Irina. Including the task force commander. Not killed, Irina corrected quietly. Evacuated. Medical discharge. The 8 deaths were real, though. My team. My responsibility. The weight of those words settled over the room like a shroud. Mason found himself staring at this woman, this supply clerk who assembled weapons blindfolded, who coordinated combat strikes with the precision of a master tactician, who carried the guilt of 8 deaths in her eyes. Aiden, the young lieutenant who had been overwhelmed by the crisis, spoke up hesitantly. Ma'am, if you were the commander of a joint task force, why are you working in logistics? Because I couldn't be trusted in the field anymore. Irina's honesty was brutal. I made a choice that saved 42 lives and cost 8 others. The math says I did the right thing. My nightmares disagree. She moved toward the door. The seals are safe. My work here is done. Kane moved to block her path, not aggressively, but with purpose. Hang on, you can't just... His hand reached out to grab her arm. Irina's response was pure instinct. She sidestepped, redirected his momentum, and Kane found himself stumbling forward, completely off balance. He caught himself against the table, breathing hard, eyes wide with shock. What the... Sorry. Irina immediately shifted back to her deferential posture. Reflex. I didn't mean to... That was Krav Maga, Marshall said slowly. Advanced tactical defense, the kind they teach to special operations personnel. Noah finished. I've seen it before. She didn't even think about it. Pure muscle memory. Kane straightened up, rubbing his shoulder where he'd caught himself against the table. The mockery was gone from his face entirely, now replaced by something approaching respect. Where did you serve? Kandahar, Helmand Province, Coast. A few other places that aren't on maps. Irina's voice was quiet. 15 combat deployments over 8 years, 127 missions, and 1 mission that ended with 8 flag-draped coffins. But Crystal had moved closer, her earlier hostility transformed into something more complex, uncertainty mixed with reluctant admiration, and what might have been shame. The file said you're a supply clerk. Why would they? Because I asked them to. Irina met Crystal's eyes. After Redwing 2, I couldn't lead anymore, couldn't make those decisions. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces. The 8 who didn't come home. She gestured at the tactical display, where the blue markers representing the rescued SEALs were now moving toward the extraction point. But I can still do this, coordinate from a distance, use my training to help without being responsible for sending people into harm's way. Admiral Brennan stepped forward, his weathered face showing deep lines of concern. Irina, you saved 50 lives today. That should count for something. It does, she said softly. It counts as 50 more people I didn't fail. The radio crackled again. Base, this is Hawk 7-9er. We're at the extraction point. All 50 personnel accounted for 0 casualties. Dylan's voice carried profound emotion. I need to speak to whoever coordinated that strike. I don't know who you are, but you just performed a miracle. That was the most precise combat support I've experienced in my entire career. Irina reached for the radio, then stopped. Her hand trembled slightly before she pulled it back. Tell him it was a team effort. Like hell it was, Marshall said, but his tone had completely changed from earlier. You did that. Own it. I don't want to own it. Irina's voice was barely audible. I just want to do my job and not have anyone die because of my decisions. Hannah had continued searching databases, pulling up whatever fragments of information weren't sealed. Redwing Two. The official report says the task force commander made an impossible choice. Extract 8 wounded team members or hold position to prevent enemy forces from overrunning a village of 400 civilians. The commander chose to hold position. The village was saved. The 8 wounded. She trailed off. Bled out waiting for extraction that came 6 hours too late. Irina's voice was steady, but her eyes showed the weight of those memories. I made the call. I gave the order. I told my medic to prioritize the villagers' evacuation over our wounded. By the time we could get them out, it was too late. You saved 400 lives, Noah said firmly. I killed 8 of my own people. Irina's response was immediate. There's no equation that makes that acceptable, Master Chief. Crystal surprised everyone by speaking up, her voice unsteady. I owe you an apology. Everything I said earlier, the way I treated you, was based on what you saw, Irina interrupted. A supply clerk who stepped out of her lane. You weren't wrong to question my presence. You just didn't have all the information. That's generous of you, but it doesn't matter. Irina moved toward the door again. The crisis is over. I'll return to my normal duties. Hold on. Admiral Brennan's voice carried command authority. We need to discuss your reinstatement. An officer with your skills hiding in logistics, it's a waste of talent and experience. It's not a waste if it keeps me from getting more people killed, Irina countered. Admiral, with respect, I know my limitations. I can coordinate from a command center, but I can't lead in the field anymore. I can't look someone in the eye and send them into a situation where they might not come back. Right now, you're probably thinking she's just lucky that maybe she overheard something, but stick with me here because the skills she's about to demonstrate aren't things you can fake. The way she handles that weapon, the terminology she uses, the split-second decisions under pressure, those are earned through years in combat zones. What's coming next will blow your mind. Stay tuned. Logan had entered the operations center fully now, still wearing his flight gear. I don't know who you are, but those coordinates you gave me were perfect. Enemy positions marked friendly positions, clear approach, vectors optimal for munitions deployment. I've flown combat missions with dedicated forward air controllers who couldn't do what you just did. Training? Irina said simply. No. Logan shook his head. Training gets you competent. What you just demonstrated was mastery. That's years of field experience, high-pressure decision-making, and an intuitive understanding of three-dimensional battlefield dynamics. He glanced at the sealed file notation on Hannah's screen. Whatever's in that classified file, it explains everything we just witnessed. Dalton had been uncharacteristically quiet, working through his own internal calculations. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost all its earlier arrogance. Commander Carter, I owe you an apology. I treated you like a supply clerk, Irina finished. Which is what my uniform and badge say I am. You weren't being unfair, Colonel. You were reading the information available to you. But I was dismissive, condescending. Dalton's jaw clenched. I let my assumptions about gender and rank override basic respect. That's inexcusable. It's human, Irina corrected. People make assumptions based on limited data. It's how our brains work. The problem isn't that you made assumptions, it's that the system encouraged those assumptions by burying my real background. Mason had been watching this entire exchange with growing understanding. You wanted to disappear, he said suddenly. That's why you requested logistics. Not because you couldn't do the work anymore, but because you didn't want anyone to know who you were. You didn't want the responsibility, the expectations, the burden of command, Irina finished. Exactly. Hannah minimized the classified file notation and pulled up an unclassified military news article from 19 months ago. This was the public report on Operation Redwing Two. It says the task force commander displayed extraordinary leadership under impossible circumstances, saving 400 civilian lives at great personal cost. It mentions that the commander received the Navy Cross but declined the ceremony. She looked up at Irina. That was you. The Navy Cross was supposed to be posthumous, Irina said quietly. When they realized I survived my injuries, they wanted to present it publicly. I refused. You don't get decorated for losing your team. You get decorated for making impossible choices under fire, Noah said firmly. I've read the full report, the classified version. What happened at Redwing 2 wasn't your fault. You were given incomplete intelligence, insufficient support, and a tactical situation that had no good outcomes. You made the least bad choice available. Tell that to the 8 families who buried empty coffins because I couldn't get their loved ones out in time. Irina's voice cracked slightly before she controlled it. Tell that to Sergeant Anderson's daughter, who asked me at the memorial why Daddy wasn't coming home. Tell that to... She stopped, closing her eyes briefly. It doesn't matter. What's done is done. The operations center had fallen into a heavy silence. Even Kane, who had started the encounter with mockery and skepticism, now stood with his head bowed, absorbing the weight of Irina's words. Specialist Daisy Chen, who had been quiet throughout most of the exchange, suddenly spoke up. "Ma'am, I have a question. If you don't want command responsibility, why did you step in today? You could have stayed quiet, let the senior officers make the call. Nobody would have blamed you." Irina opened her eyes and looked at Daisy. "Because 50 people would have died, and I have enough ghosts following me around. I didn't need 50 more. But you took command anyway," Daisy pressed. "You gave orders, coordinated the strike, made life and death decisions. That's exactly what you said you couldn't do anymore." "Distance," Irina said after a moment. "From here in this operations center, they're just markers on a screen. I don't know their names, don't see their faces. It's easier to make tactical decisions when you're not looking into the eyes of the people you might be sending to their deaths." "That's not healthy," Dr. Willow Grant said. She had entered during the crisis and stayed to monitor the situation. As the base's senior medical officer, she recognized the symptoms immediately. "You're describing classic PTSD avoidance behavior. You're trying to maintain emotional distance as a coping mechanism." "And it works," Irina replied. "I can function in logistics. I can coordinate from a command center when necessary. What I can't do is stand in front of a team, look them in the eye, and tell them they're going into a situation where some of them might not come back. I can't carry that weight anymore." Willow moved closer, her voice gentle but firm. "You're already carrying it. You've been carrying it for 19 months. Changing your job title didn't change the burden, it just made you carry it alone." Before Irina could respond, the door opened and Commander Dylan Morrison entered, still in full combat gear, his face streaked with dust and sweat. Behind him, 4 more SEALs filed in, all looking exhausted but alive. Dylan's eyes scanned the room until they locked on Irina. "That voice," he said slowly, recognition dawning. "I knew I recognized it. Whiskey Delta 7, authentication code Ghost Actual." He took 3 steps forward, then snapped to attention and saluted. "Commander Carter, ma'am, I served under you in Kandahar 3 years ago. Bravo team attached to your task force for Operation Phantom Thunder." Irina didn't return the salute. Instead, she took a step back, shaking her head. "I'm not a commander anymore, Dylan, just a supply clerk." "Respectfully, ma'am, that's nonsense." Dylan lowered his salute but maintained his stance. "You just saved 50 lives with the most precise combat coordination I've ever experienced. You are exactly who you've always been, the best tactical commander I've ever worked with." "I lost 8 people," Irina said, her voice tight, "and saved 50 today, plus the 42 from Redwing Two, plus the 200 in Phantom Thunder, plus countless others in the 127 missions you ran." Dylan's voice was passionate now. "Ma'am, I understand guilt. Every operator does. We all have missions that didn't go perfectly, decisions we second guess. But you can't let one bad day define an entire career of excellence." "It wasn't a bad day," Irina said quietly. "It was 8 people who trusted me to bring them home, and I failed them." "You made an impossible choice." Dylan looked around the room at the other officers. "Does anyone here actually believe that choosing to save 400 civilians over 8 already wounded soldiers was the wrong call?" The silence that followed was answer enough. "Then stop punishing yourself for it," Dylan continued. "Those 8 operators knew the risks. They signed up for this life, understanding that sometimes the mission means sacrifice. They would have made the same call you did. You don't know that." "Actually, ma'am, I do." One of the SEALs who had entered with Dylan stepped forward. "Sergeant First Class Michael Anderson. I'm Tommy Anderson's brother, one of the 8 who died at Redwing Two. And before you apologize again, let me tell you something. Tommy wrote letters, lots of them. Sent one home every week. In his last letter, written 2 days before the mission, he talked about you, about how you were the kind of commander who actually gave a damn about the people under you. He said if anything ever happened to him, it would be because you'd made the best call you could with the information available. Irina's composure cracked. Tears welled in her eyes, though she fought to maintain control. Michael, I didn't know you were stationed here. Transferred in last month. Michael's own voice was thick with emotion. When I heard there was a Commander Carter working in logistics, I thought it was a coincidence. But then I saw you in the mess hall one day and I recognized you from Tommy's descriptions. I wanted to talk to you, but you always left before I could approach. I'm sorry. The words seemed inadequate, but Irina said them anyway. I'm so sorry I couldn't save him. He wouldn't want you to be, Michael said firmly. Tommy believed in the mission. He believed in you. And he died knowing that his sacrifice meant 400 people, including 73 children, got to live. That's not a failure, ma'am. That's exactly what he signed up for. The room had fallen completely silent. Even Dalton, who had started this entire situation with his dismissive arrogance, stood with his head bowed, absorbing the weight of this revelation. Admiral Brennan finally spoke his voice, carrying the authority of decades of command. Commander Carter, I'm going to make this an order rather than a request. You will meet with Dr. Grant for a full psychological evaluation. You will consider reinstatement to active command status, and you will stop hiding your capabilities in a logistics warehouse. Admiral, Irina began. That's an order, Commander. Brennan's tone softened slightly. You've been running from yourself for 19 months. It's time to stop running and start healing. Okay, you've seen the hints. You've watched her handle situations that shouldn't be possible for a supply clerk, but nothing you've seen so far prepares you for what happens in the next 60 seconds. This is the moment where everything clicks, where the mystery explodes wide open. Keep watching, because this reveal is absolutely insane. Irina looked around the room at the faces staring at her, some with admiration, some with respect, some with simple human compassion. Kane had moved closer, his earlier aggression replaced by something approaching reverence. Crystal's face showed complex emotions wrestling with her own behavior and assumptions. Mason and Daisy were watching with undisguised awe. Even Dalton, despite his earlier condescension, now stood at attention. I don't want the spotlight, Irina said finally. I don't want the expectations, the pressure, the responsibility of being who you really are, Hannah interrupted gently. Commander, you can wear logistics fatigues and carry a supply manifest, but you can't hide your nature. When 50 lives were on the line, you didn't hesitate. You didn't calculate whether it was your responsibility or worry about the emotional consequences. You saw people who needed help and you helped them. That's not something you can turn off no matter what your job title says. She's right, Dr. Grant added. Avoidance isn't treatment, Commander. It's just delay. The guilt you're carrying won't disappear. Because you change careers, it'll just metastasize until it consumes everything else. You need to process what happened at Redwing Two, not bury it under supply requisitions. Irina's shoulders sagged slightly, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. I don't know if I can. You don't have to know right now, Brennan said. But you do have to try. And that starts with accepting that you're not just a supply clerk, you're a decorated combat commander who made an impossible choice and has been punishing herself for it ever since. A commotion outside the operations center drew everyone's attention. Through the windows, they could see more SEALs arriving, word having spread about the rescue. Within minutes, all 50 members of Dylan's team had assembled in the corridor, their faces showing the strain of combat, but also profound relief at being alive. Dylan stepped to the door and opened it. Team attention! 50 SEALs snapped to attention in perfect unison. This is Commander Irina Carter. Dylan announced, his voice carrying down the corridor. Some of you may recognize the name from Operation Phantom Thunder, or a dozen other missions where she provided tactical oversight that saved lives. Today she did it again. She's the reason all 50 of us are standing here instead of in body bags. The SEALs remained at attention, but their eyes all turned to Irina. I don't want recognition, Irina said quietly. I was just doing your job. Dylan interrupted with a slight smile. Funny thing about that, ma'am, your job is supposed to be counting supplies, but somehow, when 50 SEALs needed saving, you turned into the most capable combat coordinator any of us have ever worked with. Seems like maybe you're in the wrong job. Or maybe, Michael added, you're exactly where you need to be, doing work that matters while trying to heal. But healing doesn't mean hiding, ma'am. It means accepting what happened and finding a way to move forward. Irina looked at the assembled SEALs at their faces, showing respect and gratitude. She looked at the officers in the operations center, their earlier skepticism transformed into understanding. She looked at Admiral Brennan, whose weathered face showed both concern and hope. "I'll meet with Dr. Grant," she said finally. "I'll consider what you've said about reinstatement, but I'm not making any promises." "That's all I'm asking," Brennan replied. "Give yourself the chance to heal properly instead of just hiding from the pain." Crystal stepped forward, her earlier arrogance completely gone. "Commander, I owe you more than an apology. I owe you a confession. I've been projecting my own insecurities onto you since I arrived at this base. I'm the only other woman in command positions here, and I've been fighting so hard to prove I belong that I forgot how to support other women. Seeing you someone obviously more capable than me made me defensive instead of collaborative. That's inexcusable." "It's understandable," Irina replied. "You're fighting an uphill battle in a male-dominated field. That creates defensive behaviors. I don't blame you for that." "But I should be better," Crystal insisted. "Women in military leadership need to support each other, not tear each other down. I let my own fears turn me into exactly the kind of officer I hate, the one who judges based on appearances and rank instead of capability." Kane cleared his throat awkwardly. "Yeah, about that, I'm pretty sure I owe you about 17 apologies, ma'am, starting with the Call of Duty comment and ending with pretty much everything else I said." "You were protecting the integrity of command decisions," Irina said diplomatically. "I appeared to be someone overstepping their authority. Your skepticism was warranted. My condescension wasn't," Kane countered. "I've been in combat for 12 years, and I should know better than to judge someone's capabilities by their current rank or position. Hell, half the best operators I've known started as cooks or mechanics. Skills show up in unexpected places. I forgot that lesson today, and I'm sorry." Marshall had been quiet, processing everything he'd witnessed. Now he stepped forward, extending his hand. "Commander, I'd like to formally request that you provide tactical consultation for our special operations teams. Not as a commander, I understand you're not ready for that. But as an advisor, your skills are too valuable to waste even if you're not comfortable with direct command responsibility." Irina looked at the offered hand for a long moment before taking it. "I'll consider it, but I need time to work through everything else first." "Understood." Marshall's handshake was firm and respectful. "The offer stands whenever you're ready." Military personnel, especially those in high-risk special operations roles, face unique financial planning challenges that civilian advisors often don't understand. Specialized veteran financial services address combat, pay optimization, deployment, insurance, disability, benefit maximization, and post-service transition planning. Many retired Special Forces operators leverage their unique skill sets into high-value private sector security consulting roles, but protecting those assets requires sophisticated insurance products designed for high-net-worth individuals with non-traditional career paths. Understanding military pension benefits, VA loan advantages, and tax-optimized investment strategies specific to veterans can dramatically impact long-term financial security for service members and their families. As the immediate crisis faded and normal operations resumed, the story of what happened in the operations center began spreading through the base. By evening, everyone knew that the quiet supply clerk who processed requisitions and organized inventory was actually a decorated combat commander hiding from her past. The reactions varied. Some people felt betrayed by the deception. Others understood the need for anonymity after trauma. But most people simply reassessed their assumptions about who might be extraordinary beneath an ordinary surface. Irina returned to her small quarters in the logistics section, exhausted mentally and emotionally. She stood in front of her mirror, studying her reflection. The person looking back wore supply fatigues with a specialist rank patch. But behind those eyes lived years of combat experience, tactical expertise, and the weight of impossible choices. She rolled up her sleeve, exposing the tattoo she kept hidden. The Navy Special Warfare Trident, the SEAL insignia rendered in black ink with 3 gold stars above it indicating command level. Beneath the trident were coordinates the location of Operation Redwing 2, and beneath that 8 names: Tommy Anderson, Patricia Chen, Marcus Rodriguez, Jennifer Blake, David Kim, Sarah Mitchell, James Peterson, Michael Torres, her team, her responsibility, her ghosts. She traced her finger over each name, whispering words she'd said countless times before. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But for the first time in 19 months, another thought followed. Maybe Michael Anderson was right. Maybe Tommy wouldn't want her punishing herself forever. Maybe saving 50 lives today was a form of redemption. Not complete, never complete, but a step toward healing. Her encrypted phone buzzed with a message from Admiral Brennan. Dr. Grant has time tomorrow at 0900 hours. Don't make me turn it into a direct order. AB. Irina smiled despite herself. The old admiral knew exactly how to motivate her, not through authority, but through the relationship they had built over years of working together. She typed back, I'll be there. As she prepared for sleep, her mind replayed the events of the day. The mockery and dismissal from Dalton, the skepticism from Marshall, Crystal's jealous hostility, Kane's condescension, and then the slow revelation as they realized she was more than she appeared. The moment Dylan recognized her voice, the confrontation with Michael Anderson that broke through her careful emotional walls, and 50 Navy SEALs who got to go home to their families because she'd been in the right place at the right time, despite all her efforts to disappear into anonymity. Tomorrow, she would start dealing with the trauma she'd been avoiding. She would talk to Dr. Grant about the nightmares, the guilt, the weight of command decisions that haunted her. She would begin the difficult work of healing instead of just hiding. But tonight she allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. 50 people were alive who would have died. That counted for something. It had to count for something. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in 19 months, when she saw the faces of Tommy Anderson and her 7 other lost team members, they weren't accusing her. They were just there, present in her memory as they had been in life, brave, committed, willing to sacrifice for the mission. Maybe that was what healing looked like. Not forgetting, not erasing the guilt, but learning to carry it without being crushed by its weight. Maybe sleep came slowly, but when it finally arrived, it was deeper and less troubled than it had been in many months. Outside her window, the base continued its 24-hour operations helicopters, taking off supply trucks, rolling and personnel changing shifts. The machinery of military logistics never stopped, and somewhere in that vast operation, a woman who had once commanded elite special operations forces was finding her way back to herself, one painful step at a time. The night guard passing by her quarters noted the light finally going off in Specialist Carter's window and marked it in his log. Just another routine night on the base as far as he knew. He had no idea that the person sleeping in that small room had saved 50 lives that day, or that she carried the weight of 8 lost souls everywhere she went. But then again, that was the point. Some heroes preferred to remain invisible, working in the shadows, doing what needed to be done without recognition or acclaim. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities for both healing and service. But tonight, Irina Carter, commander, SEAL Task Force leader, logistics specialist, and haunted warrior, simply rested, knowing that at least for today, she had made a difference. And sometimes, in the complicated calculus of combat and command saving lives, and making a difference was the only redemption available. Morning came with the harsh buzz of Irina's alarm at 0530 hours. She'd slept better than expected, though. The dreams still came, they always came. But they'd been different this time, less accusatory, more accepting. She dressed in her logistics uniform, the supply specialist badge feeling heavier than usual now that people knew what it concealed. As she walked toward the medical building for her appointment with Dr. Grant, she noticed the changes immediately. Personnel, who had previously ignored her, now straightened slightly when she passed. Some nodded respectfully. A few younger soldiers even looked like they wanted to approach her, but weren't sure if they should. Word traveled fast on a military base. Dr. Willow Grant's office was tucked into the corner of the medical facility, a small space that felt more like a comfortable living room than a clinical environment. Irina arrived precisely at 0900 hours, her military punctuality overriding her reluctance. Commander Carter. Willow gestured to a leather chair. Thank you for coming. Admiral Brennan made it clear I didn't have much choice. Irina settled into the chair, her posture rigid despite the comfortable furniture. He can be persuasive, Willow smiled gently, But I'm glad you're here regardless of the motivation. What happened yesterday was extraordinary, but it also exposed something you've been trying to keep buried. That's not sustainable. I'm aware. Irina's fingers drummed against her thigh, 3 taps, pause, 2 taps. The same combat rhythm she'd displayed in the operations center. Willow noticed, but didn't comment directly. Tell me about Operation Redwing 2. Not the tactical details, the emotional experience. For the next hour, Irina talked. Hesitantly at first, then, with increasing openness, as Willow's non-judgmental presence encouraged her to articulate things she'd been holding inside for 19 months. The impossible choice between 8 wounded teammates and 400 civilians. The radio calls begging for extraction. The medic's face when Irina ordered him to prioritize civilian casualties. The long 6 hours waiting for helicopters that arrived too late. The memorial service where she'd had to stand before families and explain why their loved ones weren't coming home. I was their commander. Irina said, her voice tight with controlled emotion. They trusted me to bring them home. And I failed. You made a command decision that saved 400 lives, Willow countered gently. That's not failure, that's leadership under impossible circumstances. Tell that to Tommy Anderson's daughter. She was 6 years old, standing at her father's memorial, holding a folded flag. Irina's hands clenched. She asked me why Daddy wasn't coming home. What was I supposed to say? Sorry, sweetheart, but 400 strangers were mathematically more valuable than your father? No, Willow said firmly. You tell her that her father was a hero who understood the mission and accepted the risks, that he died protecting innocent people because that's what warriors do. That his sacrifice meant 73 children got to grow up with their parents. That matters, Commander. It doesn't bring him back. Nothing will. But punishing yourself by hiding in logistics doesn't honor his memory either. You know what would honor it, using your skills to save more lives, being the commander he believed in, turning his sacrifice into something meaningful by ensuring fewer people have to make the same choice you did. Irina sat in silence, processing this. Outside the window, she could see the base going about its morning routine. Personnel running, PT vehicles, moving supplies, the steady rhythm of military operations. I don't know if I can do that, she admitted finally. Stand in front of a team again, knowing I might send them to their deaths. Every commander carries that burden, Willow said. The question isn't whether you can eliminate the fear, it's whether you can carry it without letting it paralyze you. Yesterday proved you can. When 50 lives needed saving, you didn't freeze. You acted. That was different. I was coordinating from a distance, not leading in the field. But you were leading, making decisions, taking responsibility, accepting the burden of command. The physical distance doesn't change the fundamental act of leadership. Willow leaned forward. Commander, you can't run from who you are. Yesterday demonstrated that. The moment lives where at stake the real you emerged regardless of what uniform you were wearing. Before Irina could respond, her phone buzzed with a message from Mason. Operations Center. Admiral Brennan requests your presence. Non-urgent but important. Irina showed the message to Willow. I should go. We'll continue this tomorrow. Same time. Willow stood. And Commander, what you did yesterday stepping up, despite your fears, saving those 50 SEALs that took more courage than most people will ever understand. Don't dismiss that. The walk to the operations center felt different now. People weren't just noticing her. They were actively making space, showing small signs of respect. A captain she'd never met before nodded as she passed. 2 sergeants stepped aside to let her through a doorway first. The subtle deference was uncomfortable after 19 months of deliberate invisibility. She entered the operations center to find it less crowded than yesterday, but still occupied by several key personnel. Admiral Brennan stood near the main display. Colonel Dalton was present along with Marshal Hannah and, surprisingly, Kane Crystal Mason and Daisy. Commander Carter. Brennan's greeting was formal but warm. Thank you for coming. We have a situation that requires your expertise. Admiral, I'm still just a logistics. Please. Brennan held up a hand. Let's dispense with that fiction. Everyone in this room knows who you are now. The question is whether you're willing to help us again. Irina's jaw tightened, but she nodded. What's the situation? Hannah activated the display, showing satellite imagery of a mountainous region. Intelligence intercept suggests a high-value target is meeting with terrorist cell leaders in this area. We have a narrow window for a strike, But the terrain is complex and civilian population density is high. We need someone who can identify precise targeting coordinates that neutralize the threat without collateral damage. You have tactical analysts for this, Irina pointed out. We do, Marshall agreed. But after yesterday, we'd prefer to have the best. Your ability to process three-dimensional battlefield dynamics and calculate precision strikes is exceptional. We're asking you to consult, not command. Irina studied the imagery, her tactical mind automatically processing elevation, data, structural analysis populations patterns. Time frame, 72 hours, Hannah said. Maybe less if the target moves. I'll need access to updated satellite feeds, thermal imaging, and local intelligence reports. Irina moved closer to the display, her fingers tracing potential approach vectors. Also, ground-level reconnaissance if available. Buildings that old often have basement structures that don't show on aerial imagery. You'll have everything you need, Brennan promised. But there's something else we need to discuss first. He gestured to Dalton. The colonel stepped forward, his usual arrogance completely absent. Commander, I've submitted a formal report about yesterday's incident. It includes my behavior toward you. The dismissiveness, the condescension, the way I physically caused you to spill coffee. I've recommended myself for a formal reprimand and mandatory training on unconscious bias. That's not necessary? Irina began. It absolutely is, Dalton interrupted. I'm a lieutenant colonel with 15 years of service, and I treated a decorated combat commander like she was invisible because she was wearing logistics fatigues and serving coffee. That's a failure of leadership on my part. If I can't recognize capability regardless of current rank or position, I have no business commanding anyone. Crystal stepped forward next. I've submitted a similar report, Commander. My behavior was inexcusable. I let my own insecurities and competitive anxiety turn me into exactly the kind of officer who perpetuates gender discrimination in military culture. I've requested assignment to the Base Diversity and Inclusion Committee, and I'd like to work with you if you're willing to develop better protocols for recognizing and utilizing talent regardless of how it's packaged. Kane cleared his throat. Yeah, so I also filed a report. Turns out, making Call of Duty jokes to a Navy Cross recipient is pretty high on the list of things that make you look like an idiot. Who knew? His attempt at humor couldn't quite mask the genuine regret in his voice. Seriously though, ma'am, I'm sorry. I've been in combat long enough to know that courage and skill don't always announce themselves with medals and rank insignia. I forgot that yesterday, and it won't happen again. Irina looked at the three of them, former antagonists, now showing genuine accountability. I appreciate the apologies, but the system that allowed this to happen is bigger than any individual. If you really want to make amends, focus on changing that system. Make sure the next person with hidden capabilities doesn't have to prove themselves by saving 50 lives before anyone takes them seriously. Agreed, Brennan said, which is why I've initiated a base-wide review of personnel assignments. How many other talented people are we wasting because we're only looking at surface credentials? How many capabilities are we missing because someone doesn't fit our preconceived image of what competence looks like? Mason had been quiet, but now he spoke up. Commander, yesterday you mentioned that you'd been working logistics for 18 months. In that time, did anyone ever ask about your background, your skills, whether you might have more to offer? No, Irina said simply. And I preferred it that way. I requested anonymity. I got it. But should you have gotten it? Hannah challenged gently. If someone with your capabilities wants to hide, should we let them? Or do we have a responsibility to encourage people to contribute their best, even when they're traumatized and scared? That's a complicated question. Dr. Grant's voice came from the doorway. She'd followed Irina to the operations center. Forcing someone to confront trauma before they're ready can be re-traumatizing. But enabling complete avoidance isn't therapeutic either. There's a balance between respect for individual autonomy and recognition that isolation often perpetuates suffering. Which brings us to why I really asked you here, Brennan said. Commander Carter, I'm officially offering you reinstatement to your former rank with full command authority. You'd be assigned to this base as tactical advisor for special operations, with the option to transition back to field command if and when you're ready. Irina's breath caught. Admiral, before you answer, let me be clear about what this means. Brennan's voice was firm but compassionate. This isn't about pressuring you to return to a role you're not ready for. It's about acknowledging that you're already performing commander-level work whether you wear the rank or not. Yesterday proved that. This consultation request proves it again. You can keep pretending to be a supply clerk, or you can accept what everyone already knows: you're a tactical expert whose skills save lives. I lost 8 people, Irina said, her voice barely above a whisper. And saved 442 if we count yesterday, Brennan countered. Commander, every leader makes decisions that cost lives. That's the burden of command, but hiding from that burden doesn't eliminate it. It just ensures your skills aren't available when they're needed most. You can honor your 8 lost teammates by continuing to save others, or you can hide in a warehouse counting supplies. Which choice do you think they'd respect more? The question hung in the air like smoke. Irina closed her eyes, seeing the faces of Tommy Anderson, Patricia Chen, Marcus Rodriguez, Jennifer Blake, David Kim, Sarah Mitchell, James Peterson, Michael Torres. 8 people who had trusted her, followed her, died under her command. But she also saw the faces of the 42 who had lived because of her decision at Redwing Two. The 400 civilians, 73 children who had been evacuated safely. And now 50 Navy SEALs who had gone home to their families because she'd stepped up despite her fears. I need time to think about it, she said finally. Fair enough? Brennan nodded. But while you're thinking, I'd like you to work on this tactical analysis. Consider it a trial run. If you can function effectively in an advisory role, maybe that's the path forward. Not field command if you're not ready, but strategic consultation where your expertise makes a difference. Irina studied the satellite imagery again, her mind already processing vectors and variables. I'll need workspace with secure access to classified intelligence feeds. You'll have an office in this building, Hannah said. Fully equipped clearance level 5 access. Whatever you need. And support staff, Marshall added. Mason has requested assignment as your assistant. Given his performance yesterday, noticing details, others missed adapting quickly to the situation, I think he'd be valuable. Mason straightened, trying to control his obvious excitement. I'd be honored to work with you, Commander. I'm not a commander anymore, Irina said automatically, then stopped. At least not officially. Yet, Brennan said with a slight smile. Think about the offer, Irina, and in the meantime, help us with this tactical analysis. Lives may depend on it. The words were calculated, and Irina knew it. Brennan understood exactly how to motivate her, not through rank or authority, but through the fundamental truth that her skills could save lives. And if lives were at stake, she couldn't refuse. I'll start immediately, she said. Mason, let's set up the workspace. As they left the operations center together, Mason practically vibrated with enthusiasm. Commander, I have to say yesterday was the most incredible thing I've ever witnessed. The way you processed that tactical situation, coordinated the strike, handled the pressure. I'm not a hero, Sergeant Irina interrupted. I'm just someone with training and experience who happened to be in the right place. With respect, ma'am, that's not how anyone else sees it. Mason pulled out his phone and showed her a screen. This is the base social media feed. Everyone's talking about what happened. You're kind of famous now. Irina scrolled through the posts with growing discomfort. Photos of her entering the operations center. Speculation about her real background. Praise for the rescue operation. One post from a young female soldier read, "Just found out the supply clerk who helped me with requisitions last week is actually a Navy Cross recipient who saved 50 SEALs yesterday. Never judge people by their current position. You never know who they really are." Ah, this is exactly what I didn't want, Irina murmured. Attention, expectations, people looking at me like you're someone worth respecting, Mason suggested gently. Commander, I understand wanting privacy, but maybe being visible matters too. Every young soldier on this base, especially the women, just learned that capability matters more than rank or position. That's important. They reached a small office that had been hastily cleared and equipped with secure computer terminals, satellite feeds, and tactical displays. Daisy was already there, setting up communication systems. Specialist Chen volunteered to assist as well, Mason explained. Hope that's okay, Commander. Stop calling me Commander, Irina said, but without real heat. And yes, it's fine. We'll need communications expertise for this analysis. For the next several hours, Irina immersed herself in tactical data. She studied satellite imagery from multiple angles, analyzed thermal signatures, cross-referenced intelligence reports about the target's patterns and security measures. Mason and Daisy assisted, quickly learning to anticipate what information she'd need next. It felt good, natural, like returning to something she'd been born to do. Around 1400 hours, they were deep in analysis when Kane appeared at the door, carrying 3 lunch trays. Figured you hadn't eaten. Also, I wanted to apologize again, properly this time without an audience. Irina accepted the tray standard military fare, but she was hungry. Apology accepted, Sergeant. Let's move forward. Kane didn't leave. Permission to speak candidly, ma'am. Granted. Yesterday when you disarmed my grab so easily, that wasn't just training. That was someone who'd used those skills in real situations under real threat. How many combat deployments did you actually do? 15. Irina said quietly. Over 8 years. Kandahar, Helmand Coast, Syria, Iraq, Yemen, a few other places that aren't on official records. Kane whistled softly. And you've been here processing supply requisitions for 18 months. Ma'am, that's a waste of expertise that borders on criminal. It was my choice, which doesn't make it right. Kane set down his own tray. Look, I've seen good operators burn out. It happens. Combat takes pieces of you that don't grow back. But hiding doesn't heal those wounds, it just lets them fester. You're dealing with survivors' guilt command trauma, maybe PTSD. Burying yourself in logistics doesn't address any of that. You sound like Dr. Grant, Irina observed. Dr. Grant is smart. Kane's voice was serious now. Ma'am, I'm a combat veteran with 12 years of deployments. I've lost friends, made decisions that got people hurt. Carry guilt that wakes me up at night. The difference is, I deal with it through therapy, peer support, and continuing to do the work I'm trained for. You tried to deal with it by pretending to be someone else. Yesterday proved that doesn't work. Irina looked at him, really looked at him, seeing past the aggressive exterior to someone who understood her struggle because he'd lived his own version of it. How do you carry it? The guilt. By honoring the people I lost through continuing the mission they died for, Kane said simply. My best friend died in Fallujah covering our extraction. I could let that destroy me, or I could make sure his sacrifice meant something by being the best operator I can be. Every mission I complete successfully, every soldier I train who comes home alive, that's me honoring his memory. And if you fail again, then I fail. But at least I'll fail trying to do something meaningful, not hiding in a warehouse, pretending I'm not who I am. Kane stood. Think about it, Commander. You've got skills that save lives. Using them honors your fallen teammates more than avoiding them ever could. After he left, Mason spoke quietly. He's right, you know, about all of it. Since when did you become tactical advisor to my tactical advisor? Irina asked with a ghost of a smile. Since I watched you save 50 people yesterday and realized I was witnessing something extraordinary, Mason said. Commander, and I'm going to keep calling you that, because it's what you are, you have a gift. The way you process tactical information, calculate vectors, anticipate complications. That's not just training. That's natural aptitude combined with years of experience. Keeping that gift locked away, because you're afraid of failing again. That's letting fear win. Daisy nodded. Plus, there's the representation factor. I'm a 22-year-old woman in military communications. Every day I deal with people who assume I'm less capable because of my gender. Yesterday, you showed everyone on this base that their assumptions are wrong. That matters to people like me who are still proving ourselves. Irina felt the weight of their words, the multiple layers of responsibility and expectation, settling onto her shoulders like familiar armor. She'd spent 19 months trying to escape this burden, only to discover that it was inescapable. The question wasn't whether she'd carry it. The question was whether she'd carry it while doing meaningful work, or while hiding from herself. The legal frameworks governing military command decisions, especially in combat situations, involve complex rules of engagement, international law, and military justice codes that require specialized expertise. For veterans transitioning to civilian leadership roles, understanding how military experience translates into corporate credentials often requires professional certification programs specifically designed for former service members. Advanced leadership training courses accredited by military education institutions can help veterans articulate their tactical decision-making experience in ways that resonate with civilian employers. Additionally, legal consulting services specializing in military justice, VA disability, claims, and service-connected benefit appeals provide crucial support for veterans navigating the complex intersection of military service and civilian legal systems. By 1800 hours, Irina had completed a preliminary tactical analysis of the target location. She'd identified 3 viable strike coordinates that would neutralize the threat with minimal collateral damage risk, calculated optimal approach vectors for different aircraft types, and prepared contingency plans for 4 different scenario variations. She presented her findings to Admiral Brennan, Colonel Pierce, and Major Marshall in a brief evening meeting. Marshall studied her analysis with visible admiration. "This is exceptional work, Commander. The level of detail, the consideration of variables most analysts would miss. This is exactly why we need you in a strategic role." "I agree," Hannah added. "Our standard tactical analysis would have taken 3 days and probably missed half of these considerations. You did it in 4 hours." "With excellent support staff," Irina said, nodding toward Mason and Daisy, who stood quietly at attention near the door. "Delegation is a leadership skill," Brennan observed, "another indicator that you're functioning as a commander, regardless of what rank you're wearing." He set down the report. "Irina, I need an answer about the reinstatement. Not because I'm pressuring you, but because we have a situation developing that requires someone with your specific expertise." "What situation?" Brennan and Hannah exchanged glances. Hannah spoke first. "Intelligence has identified a hostage situation developing in Yemen. 12 American contractors being held by a terrorist organization that has connections to some of the groups you encountered during your deployments." Irina's tactical mind immediately began processing implications. "Hostage rescue is SEAL territory. Why do you need me?" "Because the hostage takers have made a specific demand." Brennan's voice was carefully neutral. "They're asking for you, by name, by your real name, not any official cover identity." The words hit Irina like physical impact. "What?" "They specifically requested Commander Irina Carter, former JSOTF leader present for negotiations," Hannah said, pulling up classified intelligence reports. "They claim to have information about Operation Redwing Two, information that only someone present during that mission would know." Irina's blood ran cold. "That's impossible. Everyone involved in Redwing 2 is accounted for, either alive on our side or dead on theirs." "That's what we thought too," Brennan said grimly. "But they've provided details that match classified after-action reports. They know tactical decisions you made, conversations you had, even—" He paused. "Even the names of your 8 casualties in the order they died." The room spun slightly. Irina gripped the edge of the table for support. "Who are they?" "We don't know yet. The communication came through multiple cutouts encrypted heavily. But someone wants you specifically, and they have information they shouldn't possess." Brennan's face was grave. "This could be a trap. Or it could be someone trying to send a message. Either way, we need to respond, and you're the only person who can verify whether their information is legitimate." "When?" Irina's voice was steady despite the turmoil inside. "We have 48 hours before they threaten to execute hostages." Hannah displayed a tactical map of Yemen. "The situation is complex. Urban environment, high civilian density, multiple potential hostile actors. It requires someone who can coordinate a precision operation under extreme pressure while potentially negotiating with an enemy who knows your history. In other words," Marshall said quietly, "it requires you." Irina stared at the map, her mind racing through scenarios and implications. Someone knew details about Redwing 2 that should have died with her team. Someone wanted her specifically. Someone was willing to kill 12 Americans to get her attention. This wasn't just a tactical challenge. This was personal. "If I do this," she said slowly, "it's not as a supply clerk. It's not even as an advisor. If I'm going to coordinate a hostage rescue where the enemy knows who I am, I need full operational authority and access to every resource available." "Agreed," Brennan said immediately. "Which means you need to accept reinstatement. Not someday. Now." Irina looked at the map at the location where 12 Americans were being held. at the challenge that seemed designed specifically to force her out of hiding. She thought about Tommy Anderson and her 7 other lost teammates, about the 42 soldiers who had lived because of her decision, about 50 SEALs who had gone home yesterday because she'd stepped up despite her fears. She thought about Kane's words. Hiding doesn't heal those wounds, it just lets them fester. She thought about Michael Anderson saying his brother would have wanted her to keep serving. She thought about Dr. Grant explaining that true healing meant accepting what happened and moving forward, not avoiding responsibility. "Okay," she said quietly. "I accept reinstatement, full rank, full authority. But I have conditions." "Name them," Brennan said. "First, Dr. Grant continues as my therapist. I'm dealing with this trauma properly, not burying it again. Second, Mason and Daisy are assigned to my tactical support team. They've proven themselves capable, and I trust them. Third, I want Kane and Crystal involved in this Yemen operation. They understand combat, and they've shown accountability for their mistakes. That matters in high-pressure situations." "Done, and done," Brennan agreed. "Anything else?" "Yeah." Irina's voice strengthened. "If I'm going to be Commander Carter again, everyone needs to understand what that means. I make tactical decisions based on saving maximum lives, even when that means sacrifice. I don't always follow conventional doctrine if I see a better way. And I absolutely will not send people into situations I wouldn't enter myself. If this Yemen operation requires field deployment, I go with the team." "Commander," Marshall began. "Non-negotiable," Irina said firmly. "I can't ask people to trust my tactical judgment if I'm not willing to face the same risks. That's what destroyed me after Redwing 2. I sent my team into danger while I coordinated from a safe position. Never again. If I'm calling shots, I'm in the field with them." Brennan studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Agreed. Though I reserve the right to overrule if your personal presence creates unnecessary operational risk." "Fair enough," Irina straightened to attention. "When do we begin?" "Immediately." Hannah pulled up detailed intelligence files. "We have 48 hours to plan and execute. That's not much time for an operation this complex." "Then we'd better get started." Irina turned to Mason and Daisy. "Alert Kane, Crystal, and anyone else involved in yesterday's operation. Conference room C, 20 minutes, full tactical briefing." "Yes, ma'am." They saluted and departed rapidly. As Irina began reviewing intelligence files, preparing her mind for the mission ahead, a small part of her recognized what had just happened. She'd stepped fully back into command, not tentatively, not reluctantly, but with clear purpose and defined terms. The supply clerk fiction was over. Commander Irina Carter had returned. 20 minutes later, the conference room filled with personnel. Kane, Crystal, Marshall, Hannah Logan, the pilot Dylan, and several of his SEALs, including Michael Anderson, Master Chief Noah Dr. Grant, and a dozen other tactical specialists. The energy in the room was focused, professional, charged with purpose. Irina stood at the head of the table, feeling the weight of her restored authority, but also, surprisingly, the rightness of it. This was who she was. This was what she'd been trained to do. "Listen up!" She began, her voice carrying command authority that had been absent for 19 months. "We have a situation in Yemen, 12 American hostages, enemy force with knowledge of classified operations, and 48 hours to plan and execute a rescue that has to be absolutely perfect." She activated the tactical display showing the compound where hostages were being held. "The enemy knows who I am. They know my background. This gives them a tactical advantage because they can anticipate my approach. But it also gives us an advantage. They're expecting me to be the person I was 2 years ago. The careful by-the-book commander who prioritized minimizing casualties. They're not expecting the person I've become, someone willing to take calculated risks, because I've already lost everything I was afraid of losing." Around the table, people leaned forward, absorbing her words. "We're going to use their knowledge against them," Irina continued. "They think they know how I operate. They're wrong. Mason, Daisy, you'll coordinate communications and technical support. Kane, Crystal, you're my ground tactical advisors, helping assess field conditions and combat readiness. Dylan, your SEAL team, is our primary extraction force. Logan, you'll coordinate air support. Dr. Grant, you're on standby for psychological assessment of both hostages and enemy personnel if we manage to capture any alive." She paused, making eye contact with everyone in the room. This is going to be dangerous. People might get hurt. We might fail. But we're going to try anyway because 12 Americans are counting on us and because whoever is using them as bait needs to learn that threatening U.S. personnel has consequences. Commander, Dylan spoke up, you mentioned deploying to the field with us. That's unusual for tactical commanders. It's necessary, Irina said firmly. The enemy requested me specifically. If I'm going to be bait for their trap, I might as well use that advantage tactically. They want me, they'll get me. But on my terms, not theirs. Michael Anderson stood. Ma'am, my brother believed in you. He trusted your leadership even when it cost him his life. Every SEAL in this room knows what happened at Redwing Two, and we understand the choice you made. You have our complete confidence and support. Around the table, heads nodded in agreement. Even Crystal, who had been so dismissive 24 hours earlier, now showed only respect and determination. Thank you, Irina said quietly. Now let's get to work. We have 48 hours to build a plan that brings everyone home alive. Let's not waste a second. The next 2 days were intense. Irina coordinated with intelligence analysts, SEAL teams, air support, and logistics personnel. She reviewed satellite imagery, studied enemy patterns, consulted with regional experts, and built contingency plans for every scenario she could imagine. Mason and Daisy proved invaluable, anticipating her needs and coordinating between different teams with efficiency that impressed even veteran operators. Kane offered ground combat perspective that helped refine tactical approaches. Crystal's intelligence analysis identified weaknesses in the enemy's security posture that others had missed. But through it all, Irina felt the pressure building. Someone out there knew details about Redwing Two. Someone was using that knowledge to lure her into a trap, and 12 innocent people would die if she failed to respond appropriately. If this story left you speechless, wait until you see what happens when a female Marine faces down an entire battalion who thinks she's just a mechanic. That video is coming up next, and it's even more intense than this one. Click that next video button now, because the comeback in that story will leave you absolutely stunned. Don't miss it. On the second evening as the operation drew closer, Admiral Brennan found Irina alone in her office, studying maps by the light of multiple screens. You should rest, he said gently. You'll need to be sharp tomorrow. I'll rest when those hostages are safe. Irina didn't look up from the tactical display. There's something wrong with this situation, Admiral. Something that doesn't add up. What do you mean? The enemy's demand for me specifically. The knowledge of Redwing Two details. The timing right after I emerge from anonymity. Irina highlighted several data points on the screen. This isn't random. Someone has been watching, waiting for the right moment to draw me out. You think this is about more than hostages? I think the hostages are bait. The real goal is something else. Irina pulled up a classified file she'd been reviewing. 3 of the 12 hostages have intelligence backgrounds, not field operatives, analysts, technical specialists. The kind of people who might know things about operations in this region. Brennan's face tightened as he understood her implication. You think someone is trying to extract intelligence through the hostages? Or through me by using them as leverage? Irina's fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up cross-reference data. If the enemy knows details about Redwing Two, they might know other classified information as well. Information they could use to compromise ongoing operations or expose intelligence assets. Then this rescue just became exponentially more complicated. Yes, sir. Irina finally looked up. Which is why I need to be in the field. If this is a trap designed specifically for me, I need to be there to recognize the signs and adapt in real time. No amount of remote coordination can substitute for boots on the ground when the situation is this fluid. Brennan sat down heavily. Irina, I've known you for a long time. I've watched you develop from a promising young officer into one of the finest tactical commanders I've ever encountered. But I also watched what Redwing Two did to you, sending you back into the field so soon after finally addressing that trauma. It concerns me. It concerns me too, Irina admitted. But 12 people are going to die if I let fear dictate my decisions. I've spent 19 months hiding because I was afraid of failing again. Yesterday proved I can't hide forever. Today proves that sometimes facing your fears is the only viable tactical option. Just promise me something, Brennan said. Promise me that if this becomes too much, if the pressure triggers something you can't handle, You'll step back and let someone else take command. I promise, Irina said. But Admiral, I don't think I'll need to. For the first time in 19 months, I feel like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be doing exactly what I was trained to do. That has to count for something. The mission launched at 0300 hours. 2 helicopters carrying SEAL teams with Irina aboard the lead aircraft, coordinating in real time. The flight to Yemen took hours, during which Irina reviewed final preparations and maintained communication with the Tactical Operations Center back at base. Mason's voice came through her headset. Commander, we're receiving updated intelligence. Enemy force strength appears higher than initial estimates. Recommend adjusting approach vector. Irina pulled up the new data on her tablet, processing it rapidly. Negative. The adjusted vector would alert their perimeter security. We maintain original approach and rely on speed and surprise to compensate for increased enemy numbers. Yes, ma'am. Mason's confidence in her judgment was absolute. The operation unfolded with precision. SEAL teams inserted under cover of darkness, using the approach vectors Irina had calculated to avoid enemy detection. She coordinated from the lead helicopter, maintaining real-time communication with all elements while analyzing incoming intelligence. When complications arose, and they always did, Irina adapted instantly. An unexpected enemy patrol required rerouting the extraction team. A structural variation in the compound meant adjusting breach points. A hostage in medical distress necessitated prioritizing medical evacuation over tactical security. Through it all, Irina made decisions with the calm authority of someone who had done this hundreds of times before. She gave orders, adjusted plans, managed resources, and kept everyone focused on the mission objective. And when the enemy finally realized they were under attack, when gunfire erupted, and the carefully planned operation threatened to devolve into chaos, Irina's voice remained steady, guiding her teams through the confusion with tactical directions that turned potential disaster into controlled success. Dylan, suppress that position from the north. Kane, flank right and cover the medical evac. Logan, bring in close air support on the eastern compound, danger close authorization given. Crystal, redirect the reserve teams to secure the extraction route. 12 Americans were pulled from the compound and loaded onto helicopters. Enemy forces were neutralized or scattered, and when the dust settled and the aircraft lifted off, heading toward safety, Irina finally allowed herself to believe they'd succeeded. All hostages secured, Dylan reported. 0 friendly casualties, mission success. The Tactical Operations Center erupted in cheers, the sound carrying through Irina's headset. Mason's excited voice. Commander, you did it, perfect execution. But Irina's attention was focused elsewhere. As the helicopter climbed toward cruising altitude, she studied the face of one of the rescued hostages, a man in his 40s with haunted eyes, who kept staring at her with recognition. Commander Carter, he said quietly, his voice barely audible over the helicopter noise. Yes, they told me to give you a message, the people holding us. He pulled a folded paper from his pocket with shaking hands. They said you'd understand what it means. Irina took the paper, unfolding it carefully. Inside was a photograph, a faded, worn, clearly taken years ago. It showed her standing with her team before Operation Redwing Two. All 8 of the teammates she'd lost were in the photo alive, smiling, unaware of what was coming. But someone had circled one face, Tommy Anderson, and written beneath it in precise handwriting, not everyone died that day. Irina's blood ran cold. What does this mean? The hostage shook his head. I don't know. They just said you'd understand. And that this isn't over. As the helicopter flew through the darkness, carrying rescued hostages toward safety, Irina stared at the photograph, her mind racing through impossible implications. Not everyone died that day. Tommy Anderson's face circled. Someone with knowledge of classified operations. What had they missed? What had happened at Redwing 2? That she didn't know. The mission had been a success. 12 Americans were safe, but something larger was unfolding, something that connected to her past in ways she didn't yet understand. And whoever was pulling these strings wasn't finished with her yet. Back at base, the reception was overwhelming. Personnel lined up to congratulate the returning teams. Admiral Brennan presented Irina with formal reinstatement papers and her commander rank insignia. The SEALs who'd participated in the rescue spoke to reporters about the flawless coordination. Crystal and Kane publicly praised her leadership. But through it all, Irina's mind kept returning to that photograph, to Tommy Anderson's circled face, to the message not everyone died that day. That evening, she sat alone in her newly assigned commander's quarters, studying the photograph under bright light, looking for any detail she might have missed. Her encrypted phone sat on the desk beside her, showing a dozen missed calls from various officials wanting debriefs and interviews. She ignored them all, focused entirely on the mystery before her. A knock at her door. "Come in." Admiral Brennan entered carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Thought you might need this. It's been a long day." "Thank you, sir." Irina accepted the cup gratefully. "Did intelligence find anything about the photograph?" "Nothing yet. We're running facial recognition on all personnel involved in Redwing 2, checking classified databases, following every lead." Brennan sat down. "But Irina, I need to ask, is there any possibility that one of your team members survived?" "No." The answer was immediate certain. "I confirmed all 8 casualties personally. I saw the bodies. I attended the memorials. Tommy Anderson died from blood loss after taking shrapnel to the femoral artery. There's no way he survived." "Then someone is playing psychological warfare using your guilt against you." "Maybe." Irina studied the photograph again. "Or maybe there's something about Redwing 2 that I don't know. Something that happened after the operation concluded." Her encrypted phone buzzed. Not a call, a message. Heavily encrypted, routed through multiple servers, origin untraceable. She opened it, heart pounding. The message contained a single video file. Irina hesitated only a moment before playing it. The video showed a man sitting in shadow features obscured by darkness and poor lighting. But his voice was clear, speaking in English with a slight accent. "Commander Carter, you performed admirably today. The hostages are safe, your teams are intact, and you've reminded the world why you're considered one of the finest tactical minds in special operations. But the mission isn't complete." The figure shifted, and something about the movement was familiar, eerily, impossibly familiar. Operation Redwing 2 had consequences beyond what you know. Decisions that created ripples you've never seen. 8 people died that day, yes, but secrets were born as well. Secrets that someone wants to remain buried. The video quality improved slightly, and Irina caught a glimpse of the man's hand. On his wrist was a bracelet paracord woven in a specific pattern, the same pattern Tommy Anderson had worn, the same bracelet she'd seen on his body during casualty confirmation. "You'll receive another message in 72 hours, the voice continued. "Coordinates for a meeting. Come alone, Commander. Come armed if you wish. But come because the answers you seek about what really happened to your team can only be found in person." The video ended abruptly. Irina played it again, and again, studying every frame, analyzing every word, looking for confirmation of the impossible thought forming in her mind. Brennan watched the video, his face grave. "This could be an elaborate trap." "It could be," Irina agreed, "but it could also be the truth. And if there's even a chance that one of my people survived Redwing 2, I have to know. You realize this is exactly what they want, to draw you out, isolate you, use your guilt, and hope against you." "I know." Irina set down the phone, her decision already made. "But I'm going anyway. Because if Tommy Anderson somehow survived and has been alive for 19 months while I mourned him, I need to understand why. And if this is someone pretending to be him, using his memory as bait, then I'm going to find them and make them understand that some lines should never be crossed." Over the next 72 hours, Irina prepared. She trained, planned, coordinated with her team, and tried to anticipate every possible scenario for the meeting ahead. But beneath all the tactical preparation ran a current of hope and fear that no amount of professional discipline could fully suppress. What if Tommy really had survived? What if everything she'd believed about Redwing 2 was incomplete? The encrypted message arrived exactly on schedule, coordinates for a remote location in neutral territory, 3 days hence. Instructions to come alone, but not unarmed. A final line. "It's time for you to know the truth, Commander." Irina showed the message to her team, Mason Daisy Kane, Crystal Dillon, and Admiral Brennan. "This is a trap," Kane said immediately. "They're isolating you deliberately." "Probably," Irina agreed. "But I'm going anyway." "Then we're coming with you," Dillon said. "Overwatch position distant but ready to intervene." "No." Irina's voice was firm. If this is real, if there's even a chance this is actually Tommy, or someone who knows what happened to him, then I need to go alone. Bringing a tactical team defeats the purpose. Commander, multiple voices began simultaneously. I appreciate the concern, Irina interrupted. But this is my call, my team, my responsibility. I need to see this through personally. Admiral Brennan studied her face. You've come a long way in 3 days, Irina. From logistics clerk to tactical commander to... what exactly? Someone chasing ghosts. Someone seeking closure, Irina corrected. For 19 months I've carried the guilt of Redwing Two. If there's more to that story, if one of my people somehow survived, or if someone is using their memory for operational purposes, I need to know. Not for tactical reasons, for personal ones. And if it's a trap, then I'll deal with it. I've been trained for this, Admiral. Trust me to handle it. The meeting was 3 days away. 3 days to prepare, to plan, to reconcile herself with whatever truth or deception waited at those coordinates. 3 days to face the ghosts of Operation Redwing. 2, one final time. As she prepared her gear, checking weapons and equipment with practiced efficiency, Irina felt a strange sense of calm. This was what she'd been avoiding for 19 months, the final confrontation with her past, the last barrier between her trauma and her healing. Whatever waited at those coordinates, she would face it. As Commander Irina Carter, as the tactical expert who had saved 50 SEALs and 12 hostages, as the leader who had finally stopped running from who she really was. The phone buzzed one final time. Another encrypted message, just 2 words, "Ghost awaits." Irina stared at the screen. Ghost. Her old call sign. The name her team had given her because she moved through combat zones like a phantom impossible to pin down, always one step ahead of the enemy. Someone knew her. Really knew her, and in 3 days she would find out who. She picked up the photograph of her team one more time, studying Tommy Anderson's smiling face. If you're alive, she whispered to the image, I'm coming for you. And if you're not, if this is someone using your memory as a weapon, then I'm coming for them too. Outside her window, the sun set over the military base, painting the sky in shades of orange and red. Another day ended, another chapter, closing, and somewhere in the darkness, answers waited. Answers that would either provide closure or open wounds Irina had spent 19 months trying to heal. But she was ready. Finally, after all this time, she was ready to face whatever truth Operation Redwing 2 had hidden in its shadows. The supply clerk fiction was dead. Commander Irina Ghost Carter had returned, and this time she wasn't running from anything. 3 days to answers, 3 days to truth. 3 days to find out whether redemption was possible or whether some ghosts could never be laid to rest. The countdown had begun.